My story on The Voice can be summed up in one question. What do you say to someone when they've given up? If you ask me what my childhood was like, I would say it was an open garage on Christmas Eve with both sides of the family enjoying dinner, laughing, and singing. So much singing. I come from a very musical family. Everyone sings. Mom, dad, grandparents, aunt, and uncle. They all sang. And so I started singing at the age of 3 in my church kids choir, and I had an affinity for it. My aunt was the choir director at church, and she's a great guitarist, and so I'm told by my parents that I used to mimic her conducting in the choir loft during practice. And so as I grew older, my family and I traveled around the island from church to church singing. So that seed of music was planted within me at a very early age. Now that I'm older, I realize that we had very humble beginnings. My mom was a public school teacher that worked across the street from my first elementary school, and my dad worked the graveyard shift as an assembly line worker for Johnson & Johnson. I remember finding out when I was older that my grandfather, Eduardo, would say to him, "Let me take him to school so you can go home and rest for a couple of hours." And my dad would say to him, "No, I want them to make sure that they see me, their father, taking them to school." He'd often come home straight from work, pack a cooler, and take us to the beach to spend time with us. Then go home, sleep for a couple of hours, and then go back to work. I never knew how much they sacrificed, nor would sacrifice for my dreams and my sisters. My dad, with my mother's support and help, went back to school and finished his bachelor's and master's and worked his way up in Johnson & Johnson. In 2002, he got a great job, and we left Puerto Rico and moved to Jacksonville, Florida, in the hopes of a better future for us. I still remember the night before we moved. I was sobbing because I just knew that I would never get to hang out with my friends again, and I knew that it would never be the same. But I had always wanted to visit the US, and so I looked forward to that. I was bilingual when I first moved to Jacksonville, but I still had a bit of an accent. I was definitely the most fluent in my family, so they relied on me, and that was hard for me as an awkward teen. Having no friends and no culture, I turned to music. Up until this point, I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, but I remember the night that all changed. I was 13 and our neighbor invited us to a concert at his church, and I remember Steve Green was singing. I had grown up listening to his music almost every Saturday morning in English and in Spanish, and so we went to that concert. I remember hearing him sing, and I remember in that very moment feeling in my soul, this is what I must do for the rest of my life, sing and talk about Jesus. I remember that very night telling my dad sheepishly, because I had already told him and he knew that I wanted to be a mechanical engineer and I wanted to make the first car that ran on water. And he just said to me, "I'll support you, but you can't just be good. You have to be the best. If you aren't the best, you'll starve." From that point on, he started having me do vocal warm-ups even at 6 in the morning on the way to school. I hated them. And he paid for me to learn classical guitar and was at every lesson and every trip, to the point that after 1 year, I was able to meet my classical guitar hero, Christopher Parkening. I eventually went and got my degree in vocal performance from Southeastern University, where I studied opera. And then after graduating, I went and I served in the local church as a worship leader, and I toured for a few years in a tenor group called Tenore all over the US, Canada, and even Italy. I ended up moving to Nashville and working at a church with great people, and I also became a session singer. And 2022, I transitioned out of full-time ministry to work as a session singer, and I became a voice teacher at Lipscomb University. That's when it all happened. One afternoon, my dad calls me and says, "Son, there's something that I did and I have to apologize." My heart sank because I had no idea what he was talking about, at which point he said, "I pretended to be you and I sent in your videos as a virtual audition for The Voice, and you got a call back." I was in shock. I had auditioned years ago in the cattle call and never got a call back, and all of a sudden here it is. You know, in my 6 years in Nashville, I had done some pretty neat opportunities, but it's safe to say that after a while, as you get older, you kind of stop believing. So what do you say to someone who's given up? It was at that moment that my father said, "I'm so sorry, son. I just believe in you so much, and I believe in the calling God has placed in your life." How could I be angry? There's so many people who will go their entire lives hoping to hear those words. And here is my father just pouring out his heart because he believed in me even when I didn't. You know, I've been sharing this story this whole time with this book in my hand, and this book is really the anchor to my story. You see, this is my first Bible. My father gave it to me, and in the inscription inside it reads, "For my son Carlos, for being a special gift from heaven to us. Even though I'm not rich, this is the greatest treasure that I can give you." And that, my friends, is the reason that I'm here. A belief that is rooted in a hope that's not of this world. A faith that was passed on to me and that I hope echoes in the way that I sing, for the praise of His glorious grace. You know, every good and perfect thing is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, the author and the finisher of my faith. And who better than Him to tell my story?